Okay, let's dive in. Something pretty fundamental just shifted in North Carolina elections.
Yeah, it's a big one. A change we haven't seen in, over a century.
Exactly. The power to appoint the State Board of Elections. It's moved.
Right. It's not with the governor anymore.
Hmm.
This all came from that new law, SB 382, passed back in December.
So we're going deep on this today. It's more than just headlines. It's about, a core power dynamic.
Absolutely. And how elections might actually be run going forward.
To really get a handle on this, we looked at quite a bit of material.
News articles, naturally.
Yeah.
Carolina Journal, Archamax, Carolina Public Press.
Yeah.
Places like that.
Plus official statements, right, from the NC Republican Party, the State Auditor's office.
And some really helpful in-depth briefings, too. Gives you the bigger picture.
Yeah, so our mission here is pretty clear. Unpack what happened, why it's such a big deal, and what it could all mean.
Without getting totally bogged down in the legalese, hopefully.
Right. Keep it focused. So maybe start with how things used to work. The old system.
Okay. So for forever, over 100 years, it was simple. The governor appointed the State Board of Elections members. Sole power.
Just the governor.
Yep. And because of that, the governor's party usually had the majority on the board. Typically a 3-2 split on that 5-member board.
Pretty straightforward. But then came SB 382.
And that flipped the script. The big change. That appointment power?
It's gone from the governor.
Exactly. It now belongs to the state auditor.
And not just for the board members, right? The auditor's role got bigger.
Oh, yeah. The auditor now also appoints the chair of the state board.
The chair, too.
And the chairs of all 100 county election boards across the state.
Wow. Okay, so that's a significant consolidation of power in a new place. For people who might not know, the state auditor, that's an elected role.
It is. Independently elected. Their usual job is, financial accountability, state government efficiency, that kind of thing.
So making them central to election oversight, that's definitely new territory.
A very significant development, yeah.
Okay, let's talk politics then, because the timing and the players here seem important.
Crucial. The current state auditor is Dave Boliek. He's a Republican.
And the governor.
Josh Stein, the Democrat.
So right there, you see the partisan angle.
Immediately. It adds this whole other layer to understanding the shift.
And you mentioned this wasn't the first time Republicans tried to change the board appointment process.
Not at all. That's a really key piece of context. Ever since 2016, really, when Governor Cooper, a Democrat, was elected, Republicans in the legislature have made several runs at changing how the board members get picked.
What kinds of attempts?
Well, they tried challenging things in court. They even put a referendum to the voters.
But those didn't stick.
Nope. None of those previous efforts really achieved what the Republicans were aiming for.
So SB 382 was different. How did this one get through?
Timing was key. It passed in the final days when the GOP held a veto-proof supermajority in the legislature.
Meaning they could override a potential veto from Governor Stein?
Exactly. They had the votes.
Okay, so that sets the stage. The law passes. The power shifts to the auditor. Then came the appointments.
Right. And Auditor Boliek didn't waste much time. He announced his picks on May 1st, 2025.
And these appointments, they changed the board's makeup significantly.
Definitely. Boliek appointed 3 Republicans.
Who are they?
Francis X. DeLuca, Robert Anthony Rucho, and Stacy Clyde Foraggers IV.
And these names came from?
They were nominated by the chair of the state Republican Party. That's part of the process laid out in the law.
Got it. Can you give us a quick sketch of these Republican appointees? DeLuca?
Sure. DeLuca, he's formerly head of the Civitas Institute. That's a conservative think tank. Also a retired Marine colonel, former state ethics commission member.
Okay. Anything else stand out?
Well, yeah. He was part of the lawsuit back in 2016 that challenged same-day voter registration.
Okay. So some history with election law challenges. What about Rucho?
Robert Anthony Rucho, longtime former state senator, nearly 17 years.
What was his focus in the Senate?
Big on tax reform, but also electoral policy. And importantly, he was the lead plaintiff in that big Supreme Court case on partisan gerrymandering in 2019.
Rucho v. Common Cause.
Right.
That case basically said federal courts couldn't rule on partisan gerrymandering claims.
Exactly. So again, someone deeply involved in those kinds of electoral map and fairness debates.
Which certainly adds context here. And the third Republican.
Stacy Clyde Eggers IV. They call him 4. He's a lawyer.
Any prior board experience?
Yes, actually. He's been serving on the State Board of Elections since 2018. So He's an incumbent in a way.
And before that?
He was on his local county board, Watauga County Board of Elections.
Okay, so a mix there. Think tank background, legislative legal challenge history, and current board experience.
A pretty interesting mix, yeah.
Now, the law requires nominees from both parties, right? So the Democrats submitted names, too.
They did. The state Democratic Party sent 4 names over to Auditor Boliek.
Who was on their list?
Let's see. Stella Anderson, Siobhan Millen, Jeff Carmen, and J. Andy Penry.
Any current board members there?
Yes, Millen and Carmen are currently on the board. Anderson and Penry are former members.
And who did Auditor Boliek pick from that list?
He went with the 2 current Democratic members, Siobhan Millen and Jeff Carmen. He renominated them.
Okay, so 3 Republicans, Luca, Rucho, Eggers, and 2 Democrats, Millen, Carmen.
That's the lineup.
Which means
Republicans now hold a 3-2 majority on the State Board of Elections.
And that's the first time since 2016, you said?
Correct. A definite shift in control.
Okay, so let's get into the why. From the Republican side, what's the rationale? Why was this change needed, in their view?
Well, according to the state Republican Party, the main goal is to ensure fair, free, honest, and transparent administration of elections. That's the language they're using.
So it's framed around integrity and transparency.
Right. They argue this shift will boost public confidence, that votes are counted accurately, consistently across counties, and that the process has integrity. They've criticized the previous board, under Democratic control, for partisanship.
But the counterargument would be, you're just shifting power to a different partisan elected official, right? The auditor is a Republican.
That's the criticism, yeah. The Republican response, I think, would be that this structure, involving the auditor and nominees from both parties, creates more sort of checks and balances compared to just the governor appointing everyone. They see it as less prone to unchecked control by one party.
And what has Auditor Boliek himself said?
He echoed similar themes. He stated his appointees will focus on, quote, counting legal votes, efficient tabulation, and consistency across counties, emphasized restoring public confidence.
Okay, so the Republican narrative is about fairness, fixing perceived partisanship, boosting confidence through this structural change.
That seems to be the core message, yes.
Now let's hear the other side. How are Democrats reacting?
Not well. The reaction has been very strong.
Give me a sense.
The state Democratic Party chair called it a hostile takeover. Also used phrases like abuse of power and a disservice to North Carolinians.
Hostile takeover. Strong language.
Very. It shows how high the stakes are perceived to be. You know, trust in election fairness is just foundational.
And Governor Stein, what's his take?
He's been equally forceful. He called the change a threat to our democracy and the rule of law.
A threat to democracy. Why?
He sees it as an unconstitutional power grab, a partisan restructuring designed specifically to benefit one party. He argues it will actually undermine confidence in elections, not restore it.
So the complete opposite view of the outcome.
Exactly. And he raised a specific concern too, didn't he? About a particular case.
Yes, he did. He voiced fears that this new Republican-led board might try to influence the outcome of Jefferson Griffin's challenge to the 2024 state Supreme Court race results.
Right. That adds another layer of immediate concern for Democrats' potential interference in a specific recent election challenge.
So you have these 2 diametrically opposed views on what this law means and what it will do. It sounds like a recipe for a court battle.
And that's exactly where it went. Governor Stein filed a lawsuit challenging SB 382.
On what grounds?
The core argument is separation of powers. His team argues the law violates the North Carolina Constitution by improperly stripping the governor of executive duties and handing them to the auditor.
Can you elaborate on that argument a bit?
Sure. They're essentially saying the governor's duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed includes overseeing elections, and the legislature can't just reassign that core executive function to another branch or another elected official like the auditor whenever they feel like it.
The governor and auditor aren't interchangeable for this job, basically.
That's their point. They argue it gives the legislature too much power over how laws are carried out.
Okay. And the defense. What are the legislative leaders and Auditor Boliek arguing in court?
Their defense leans heavily on North Carolina having what's called a plural executive.
Meaning?
Meaning, unlike the federal system with one president, North Carolina elects multiple executive officials independently, governor, auditor, treasurer, etc.
Yeah.
And they argue the state constitution allows the legislature to assign specific duties to these other elected executive officials. They say giving the auditor oversight of the election board falls squarely within that power.
So it's a fundamental disagreement about how executive power works in NC and the legislature's role in assigning it.
Precisely. A real constitutional tug of war.
Have the courts weighed in yet?
Yes, there's been some back and forth already. Initially, a lower court actually sided with Governor Stein.
It did.
Yeah, a Superior Court judge ruled SB 382 unconstitutional.
But that wasn't the end of it.
Nope. That ruling was quickly put on hold by the State Court of Appeals.
Ah. So the Court of Appeals blocked the lower court's decision.
Exactly. They issued what's called a stay, which means the lower court ruling is paused while the appeal goes forward. And critically, this allowed Boliek's appointments to the board to take effect.
So as things stand right now, the law is in effect and the auditor's appointees are on the board.
Correct, at least for the time being.
What's the next legal step then?
Governor Stein has already said he plans to appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court.
So this legal fight over who controls the Board of Elections is far from over.
Far from it. The legal uncertainty is definitely going to continue.
Okay, beyond the board members themselves and the legal drama, are there other practical implications we should be thinking about? Day-to-day impacts.
That's a really important question. And yes, there's another critical piece that maybe hasn't gotten as much spotlight. Staffing.
Staffing at the State Board of Elections.
Exactly. Who runs the day-to-day operations? Key roles like the executive director, the general counsel. A new board majority could mean changes there too.
Which could shift priorities, procedures?
Potentially, yes. New leadership, new staff could mean new approaches to how the board actually functions.
And wasn't there a specific deadline related to staffing that made the timing of that Court of Appeals ruling really crucial?
Yes, absolutely. May 15th was the deadline for the board to make certain staffing decisions.
So Republicans wanted that appeals court ruling before May 15th.
You got it. The concern, from their perspective, was ending up with a Republican majority board, but being legally stuck with, say, a Democratic-appointed executive director if the court ruling came too late.
So it was strategically important to have their appointed board in place before those staffing decisions had to be made.
It highlights how interconnected the legal battle, the board appointments, and the actual operational staff are.
Does this potential staffing impact trickle down to the county level too?
It could. Remember, the state board appoints the members of the 100 county boards.
You're right, though you said the auditor now appoints the county chairs.
Correct. But the state board picks the other members. So after July 1st, when those appointments typically happen, you could see the shifting control at the state level influencing who gets appointed locally.
So changes in personnel running elections potentially at both the state and local levels.
It's a possibility, creating ripples down the line.
Okay, let's circle back quickly to that concern Governor Stein raised about the Jefferson Griffin case, the 2024 Supreme Court challenge. Is there a real chance the new board could step in and change something there?
Well, there's a counter-argument on that. Jim Sterling from the John Locke Foundation, he suggested it's unlikely.
Why unlikely?
He pointed out that the law itself, SB 382, apparently had language saying that prior proceedings would stand. He argues that under the current statute, especially before July 1st, the new board probably doesn't have the authority to just go back and modify how that challenge was handled previously.
So while the concern exists on the Democratic side,
there's an argument that legally, the board's hands might be tied when it comes to retroactively changing things in that specific case.
Interesting. Another legal nuance to watch.
Definitely. The exact powers of this new board, especially regarding past events, might still need clarification.
Okay, so bringing this all together after our deep dive, what's the absolute key takeaway?
I think the main point is simple. Control of North Carolina's election oversight body, the State Board of Elections, has flipped.
From Democratic leaning to Republican control.
Right, for the first time in years. Driven by this new law, SB 382, the auditor's appointments.
Yeah.
And all happening under the shadow of an ongoing court battle.
And for you listening, why track this? It might feel like political maneuvering.
But it's more than that. It really gets to the heart of how elections are run. Who sets the rules, who interprets them, who oversees the counts. That affects everyone.
It affects your vote, your confidence in the results. Understanding these power shifts is, well, it's just crucial for being an informed citizen, isn't it?
Absolutely. This isn't just abstract politics.
Yeah.
It has real, tangible implications for the mechanics of democracy in North Carolina.
So as we finish up, maybe here's the thought to leave you with. How might this change in control, combined with all the legal uncertainty still swirling around, actually impact election administration?
Yeah, and not just the administration, but the perception of fairness, too. How will voters feel about the process going forward?
Think about the role these boards, and importantly their staff, play in making sure everything runs smoothly and, crucially, that people trust the outcome.
It's a big question, with potentially significant consequences for North Carolina elections down the road. Something definitely worth keeping an eye on.